Welcome everybody. Title of this talk is Disruption is Coming, with a question, will Drupal survive? I'm not going to answer the question, but we're all going to be wondering it to ourselves as we go through the material. First, we're at the Florida Drupalcamp, and the code of conduct is something we want to abide by. And if we do need to report an incident, this is the information here. And now I'll jump into the talk. So I thought just the TLDR version of this is put the conclusions up front, and we'll get back to these, but I thought that these would be interesting to be thinking about as I move some of the material, which at times will maybe feel slightly unrelated, but it will all come together. So who are we depending on for Drupal's survival? We're all here at a Drupal camp. We maybe this is our first camp, or maybe this is a recent camp of many. And will this keep going on? What does it mean for it to survive? What could you do if you saw a potential disruption to that? If you saw a threat to the existence of this thing that we call Drupal, that we participate in called Drupal, that we use called Drupal, if you saw a potential disruption coming to Drupal's existence, what could you do? And whatever it is that you did do, would it be effective? Would it raise the right awareness? Would you be able to participate in the right deliberations for it to matter, for it to be effective? How would decisions be made by this thing we call Drupal? Would those decisions be inclusive of your perspective or exclusive of your perspective? Are there pros to that? Are there cons to that? And once a decision is made, even if you are involved in that decision, will we be able to act fast enough to head off this incoming disruption? If we even get to that point, by being able to make a decision to make a change. So we all face disruptions in our lives all the time. We have plans, we have things we're trying to do, and plans change, reality changes, and we have to deal with that. Throughout a lifetime, we will face disruptions of all sizes. Some of them will be small. We just have to cancel the appointment. Others will be big. Maybe if we lose a loved one, or we have to help a parent in a larger way, or there's a sickness or something. So throughout a lifetime, we will face disruptions of all sizes. A common thing that's being said in the modern era is that we live in a VUCA world. Has anybody heard this term?
I have never.
No. VUCA is a concept that originated with students at the U.S. Army War College to describe the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of the world after the Cold War.
What year, like 1980 something?
Right, where the technology is changing rapidly, things were becoming increasingly complex, faster moving, and so the volatility and the uncertainty and the ambiguity, you can imagine in the political sphere, there's a lot of different countries doing a lot of different things, and with the rapid increase in technology, they were able to do it even faster. Maneuver warfare started becoming a thing where you couldn't just put people on the battlefield and tell them to march in a certain direction. You had to have a better awareness and a better nimbleness and adaptability to survive in a VUCA world. It's a recognition of the complexity of things, and this is increasingly being used in the business world to describe what it's like to be a business trying to survive and thrive, as your competition is able to rapidly change and maneuver the competitive threat that they represent to you. So to survive in a VUCA world, we need awareness and flexibility, nimbleness, adaptability. Essentially, we need agility and we need resilience. So we live in a world like this to some degree, some to more of a degree than others. But in general, how can we better understand, survive, and thrive in a world like this? So in our personal lives, it's probably not so much a concern, for some more than others. In for a organization like Drupal, where it has competition, or for any product that has customers that it's trying to keep happy, things can change very rapidly. Things are very complex and uncertain. So how can we better understand and survive and thrive in that, which is essentially the nature of things? And to pull it back to the nature of things, this is something that physicists have been working on and continue to work on, understanding nature. How do things work? How does this VUCA world operate, and how does nature continue to be? How can the universe start with a few types of elementary particles at the Big Bang and end up with life, history, economics, and literature, and Drupal, and WordPress, and Squarespace, and Weebly? These very complex things. So what this is alluding to is traditional physics is reductionist in that it tries to break things down into small pieces and then predict things based on that. And the new physics is looking more at how do we understand the rest of the stuff, the life, history, economics, literature, the things that are happening in complexity that aren't necessarily predictable. That quote was by Per Bach, one of the leaders of the physicists that are working on a theory called self-organized criticality. Self-organized criticality is a new way of viewing nature. The basic picture is one where nature is perpetually out of balance, but organized in a poised state, the critical state, where anything can happen within well-defined statistical laws. The aim of the science of self-organized criticality is to yield insight into the fundamental question of why nature is complex, not simple, as the laws of physics imply. So there's an element, it's recognizing an element of complexity, of unpredictability in nature, but also studying how that works. So to try to understand how nature works and how nature essentially flows, Per Bach and other physicists conducted what they call a sandpile experiment. And the sandpile experiment starts with single grains of sand being dropped into a pile. And what's interesting about this is that you can use physics to understand each grain of sand and calculate and predict how it's going to fall, how it's going to land, how the falling grain of sand will fall and land. But what happens as the sand pile forms and emerges, sand starts breaking from the top and avalanching down and creating these micro piles on the sand pile, which then start forming their own little piles on the sand pile, and then those piles start avalanching down to other piles. And pretty soon, you can't predict this system. You can't understand this system by understanding each piece of sand. You have to understand it in a new way. And so self-organized criticality argues that complex behavior in nature reflects the tendency of a large system with many components to evolve into a poised, critical state way out of balance, where minor disturbances may lead to events called avalanches of all sizes. And so the Sandpile experiment represents that, where a single grain of sand can cause an avalanche that causes another avalanche that causes another avalanche. And those grains of sand we can tie back to disruptions, to the critical state of the sandpile. And so how do we understand that to better survive and thrive? The avalanches form a dynamic of their own, which can be understood only from a holistic description of the properties of the entire pile, rather than from a reductionist description of individual grains of sand. Therefore, the sand pile is a complex system. This is how we'll define what a complex system is, and this is how will be our frame of reference. So a little bit about complexity. I have a few examples here to put complexity into a context, and these examples, simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic, come from Snowden's Synaphin framework. But first, I'm going to describe them the way Jürgen Appello describes them in a post that's no longer on the internet. So, if we think about a car key, we could consider this as being a simple thing. We can understand very quickly, it's obvious how it works. You put it in the ignition, you turn it, take it out, and you keep starting the car. Simple. The car we can consider as complicated. We could figure out how it works. We could study automobiles. Maybe after a few years, we could be a pretty decent mechanic. So the car could come in, something could be wrong. We could poke around. We could say with near certainty what the issue is and provide a quote to change the system to fix it. We could predict fixing it. Car traffic, on the other hand, we can consider as complex. There are elements to traffic that add up, like all of those avalanches in the sand pile, making it impossible to predict where the breakdowns will happen, where the jams will happen, when and where different aspects of the traffic will go. We can make certain predictions here and there about the general traffic rules and where traffic, where rush hour might tend to happen. But overall, car traffic is complex. To give an example of chaos, car traffic, say in certain cities it can be so unpredictable, so much going on that you might consider, and I think this is partially tongue-in-cheek from Jürgen, but car traffic in Orlando is chaotic. So when you put it in a certain scenario, it could be chaotic. I'll switch over to the Synaphin framework in a second, but I just want to call out that in complicated situations, a management approach tends to be the right approach. In complex situations, leadership becomes much more important, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. This is the Synaphin framework, where we have the simple, the complicated, the complex, and the chaotic. And so what we're talking about with the sand pile and its and what the sand pile informs us about how nature works, that's happening in complexity. So what we're saying is that nature is complex. So what the Synaphin framework teaches us is that we need a different approach depending on whether what we're approaching is simple or complicated, complex or chaotic. If something that we're approaching to deal with is chaotic, there's no relationship between cause and effect. We essentially don't even really understand it. We need to just act first, and then sense if we're in better shape or worse shape, just keep acting. It's chaotic. So you can imagine, an animal who doesn't understand how roads work, if they find their way into the center of traffic, that's chaos. They can't. There's something that I was thinking about from the talk that I came out of, which was very good. Is about 7 ways to communicate better at work. These top two, these complex and the complicated. If you're a human being and you have the power of deliberation, you can think about things and you have the opportunity to sense, to analyze, to probe. But if you're an animal trying to cross the street, you don't understand how roads work, you're kind of forced into, you're either in a simple state where you understand your existence, or you're in a chaotic state where you just have to act and respond. But we are able to if we can understand whether we're dealing with something that's complex or complicated, we can adjust our approach and have better chances of success. One of the biggest mistakes that we can make in a project is to misunderstand it as complicated when it's really complex. Is to think that we can sense and analyze and plan it all the way out, when really there's unpredictable nature to it. We see this all the time in the projects that we try to do in what people would refer to as a waterfall approach. And the reason why the waterfall approach fails in software development, where you're trying to make customers happy, is because software development, when you're trying to make customers happy in competition with other products that are also trying to make those customers happy, is because those situations are complex. And if you think you can plan out your product from beginning to end and release it to the customer and have it be a success, you've just misunderstood a complex situation for a complicated one. And that can be that can be catastrophic to your chances of success. So nature, life, many of the things that we work on are complex, and being able to recognize that is one of the first steps. Soren Kierkegaard says, life is understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. It's just, in a lot of senses, it's just a series of events that keep happening, and we can look back and we make it make sense when we're looking back at the history of things, but we don't get to live it that way. We don't get to predict the future. We have to live life forwards, and since we don't get to predict the future, that means our approach is one that aligns more with an approach that is best suited for complexity from the previous slide. So back to self-organized criticality. So what is predictable? How can we understand these sand piles where grains of sand drop and create these avalanches and create this state where you can't predict the different sizes of avalanches? Well, it turns out that the distributions of avalanches across any set of data points that you get forms what's called this power law. This, I won't go into to teach exactly what it is, because I barely understand it myself. But really what's being shown here is you have avalanches of all sizes. You have fewer huge avalanches and more smaller avalanches. And when you watch a sand pile where grains of sand are being dropped over the pile at a steady rate, and you're measuring and you're watching every single avalanche that happens in that pile, what you end up with is this line. Correlates to this very firm line where there are basically avalanches of all sizes. You have one that's really, 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 really big, 2 that are a little bit smaller than that one, 3 that are a little bit smaller than those, and so on and so forth. And one of the biggest interesting things about this is there was already something like this. We just didn't know how to explain it, but we knew it was true. This is the Gutenberg Richter law of earthquakes. Something that we knew about earthquakes was that there would be earthquakes of all magnitudes. and if you take any data set of earthquakes and plot them out, you would have fewer of the biggest earthquakes and more of the smallest. And what happens is when there's an earthquake, then there are these like shadow earthquakes. I don't think shadow is the right word, but it kind of ripples out and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And when you plot all of the earthquakes within a given data set, you get this same power law. And so so we knew that, and then self-organized criticality emerged as a way to understand that. And so then what started happening was people were finding power laws in all of these occurrences in complexity in nature. Another one is even in evolution. There are extinctions of all sizes. So there are fewer mass extinctions, but then many more smaller extinctions. So I'm not gonna dig into these different things. These are pulled from the different studies that I was able to find on this. So what we've been talking about so far is self-organized criticality, the power laws that we can find in a self-organized critical system. And we've talked about sandpiles with avalanches of all sizes. We've talked about earthquakes of all sizes, evolution with extinctions of different sizes over time due to continuous disruption, just to bring it back to that. And I think one of the things that we can think about in relating this to the Sinefin framework is if we control these states, what would happen if we tried to control the sandpile and prevent, let's say that we don't like the avalanches. We're humans and we're gonna mess with things. We don't like the avalanches, so we're going to try to stop them from happening and control them. Or maybe we're concerned about certain things in our environment. We want to control it. And so really what we're doing is the more that we control a complex system, the more we take the complexity out of it and we turn it more into a static state. And what we're doing there is we're actually setting that system up for a chaotic event, or for something that we couldn't really call life at all. So if life to the sandpile experiment is dropping sands and avalanches, and we stop that, we've just extinguished what that means, what that thing means to be alive. Or another way to think about it is another way that they do the experiment is they have a flat bed and then dripping sand onto that, and as you raise that up, the sand will tumble down and create this avalanche. So down it's static, you're not really getting anything. Up creates that 45-degree angle will create that critical state where you have the disruptions and the avalanches and the recovery of the pieces of sand. But if you go too far, you've just created chaos. So all the way down is a simple state, in the middle is a complex state, and 90-degree angle is the chaotic state where there are no rules, everything just falls everywhere, and it's just crazy. So controlling the state is essentially messing with the state, messing with the self-organized critical aspect to it. And we're gonna kind of touch on this a little bit as we go. So what does this say about this says something about resilience. So if we think about resilience as recovering, bouncing back quickly, and we think about the sand pile with the sand being dropped on it and these disruptions happening, these avalanches happening, and each little piece of sand pulls together, and essentially the avalanche doesn't go on forever, it just happens and then it comes back to its stable state. That's in a sense that's resilience happening. I'm going to try to tie some of these things together. What about us as humans? So I asked in the beginning, and I said in the beginning, that we're going to experience disruptions of all sizes throughout our lives. So are we in a critical state? So for some reason, when I wonder if we're in a critical state and I think about resilience, I don't know if anybody's heard this song by Big Sean. Last night I took an L, but tonight I bounced back. So we have setbacks, and we also have resilience. I think there is a sense, and I think this is really what people are seeking to understand, is in what ways are we in a self-organized critical state. I think if you look out there at the literature right now, what they're looking at is, are there ways to understand how our brains are operating, to understand them as operating in this critically poised state. So where is the power law in our brain activity? Something that I think that's interesting to think about is the traffic, the element of traffic. Traffic is a complex system. We can plot out traffic jams onto one of these self-organized critical power laws. And really, if we look at the data set of traffic, what we're going to be able to map out are traffic jams of all sizes across a data set. And I think that this one is really interesting because there are people driving those cars. There are people setting up the roads. Okay, so I think that traffic can serve as a very good analogy for how we can branch the understanding of how nature works into how we work together as people. So there is a pretty good traffic analogy about how we manage traffic performance. So if we think about traffic, what is a really good operating traffic? What's good traffic? It's traffic that flows very quickly and smoothly from point A to point B. That's what we want. We want just fast, easy, predictable, safe travel from point A to point B. So traffic is a complex system. It's unpredictable. We've got tons of cars coming in from everywhere. We're building our roads. So we're actively trying to create this high-performing traffic system. So how do we do that? While I'm talking about a couple examples of how we do that, I want to think about the fact that in the Sandpile experiment, there is an equivalence amongst each grain of sand. No grain of sand is any other grain of sand's boss. None of the grains of sand are the benevolent dictator of the pile. Do we have equivalence in our organizations? Maybe at work, maybe in the Drupal community. Are we each grains of sand, or are some of us kind of more in charge than others? And how does this play out in our organizations? How do we manage people performance in our organizations? So that's really what this is going to be an analogy to: traffic performance to people performance. So this is a slide from Bart Bosnes. Wrote a book called Implementing Beyond Budgeting. I'll bring up Beyond Budgeting in a little bit. But his premise is very aligned, is this traffic analogy, and it's very aligned to what we're talking about. So there are two ways we can think about how we typically manage traffic performance. We have the traffic light, which can be considered rules-based management. When you get to your traffic stop and you're at a traffic light, you don't have to think. You just have, if it's red, you stop. If it's green, you go. Very simple. You just follow the rules, okay? So who is in control based on that information? The traffic light. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of the night in the city and you're the only car and you could just drive through it. It's red, you need to wait. And this is based on whatever information whoever programmed that light had when they programmed it. It's not based on what's happening then. It's not based on your awareness. It's based on whoever programmed that light. They're in control. These are the rules. You just follow them. Okay, the rotary is a lot different. Or the roundabout might be more commonly referred to. rotaries and roundabouts are very popular, in my experience, they're very popular in European countries and in Massachusetts. I'm not so sure about everywhere else. Americans, my understanding is that Americans typically don't like roundabouts. But when you pull up to a roundabout, who's in control? All the drivers, everyone. Based on what information? The information that everybody has. And you just need to do what's right. Get in the rotary safely. And there are some things where, the people in the rotary have the right of way, so that's general good practice. So the question is, this one is relevant in beyond budgeting, but it's also relevant to us. In which of these examples are values most important? So if you're a jerk and you're at a red light, you just have to stop. If you're a jerk and you're in a rotary, you can just cut people off, and sometimes it happens. But it's harder to make the rotary work correctly. It depends more on each one of us as individuals to have values and have concertedness and to think. So it takes more trust. Not a lot of trust is irrelevant in some regards in the traffic light, and trust is critical in the rotary. You have to trust that people are watching out. So it's a little bit harder to do, but it's far, 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 far more efficient. Okay, even and safer. Mm-hmm. So this one's interesting for a couple of reasons, because if we think about it, the data here is showing that in Wisconsin they studied this. There's a study for it, and they replaced a number of traffic signal controlled intersections. They replaced them with rotaries, and car deaths dropped 38%. Car deaths and injuries. Although, but the thing is that crashes increase. That's because so what we're saying here is that there's less chaos in the rotary. There are going to be maybe it's crashes of all sizes, far fewer fatal ones, but more less fatal ones. What the thing is with the traffic signal being so dangerous in comparison to this is, I think it's an example of trying to control what is a complex system, where we're exerting our own control on it, and what's happening is the deaths are resulting from, if you think it's green, you just go. You're not depending on other people, you're not depending on your own awareness, you're just following the rules, and someone who's not paying attention runs that red light, and that results in a death. So, interesting to think about, to try to.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. It's like people push back at rules like that.
Yes.
And then create all kinds of trouble.
Right.
I mean, I've even been in shopping malls where they really direct traffic, try to direct every move you make.
Yep.
And people rebel against it, and so it's dangerous.
Yes, absolutely. I was in Portugal last summer, and I get to experience. I was on the São Miguel Island, and you could really see the evolution, because that's a place that not a lot of people were going to maybe 5-10 years ago, and a lot of people are going there more and moving. A lot of people are moving there, and so you can see where the roads were first an intersection, and so they just put up stop signs, and then it got so big that the road's bigger now. We'll just put up traffic lights. But what they're doing there is every place they can, they're replacing the traffic lights with the rotaries. So you have to build the road different, but I think it really felt to me like a mark of a cultural difference, where you're building the system that works better, but you're trusting the people to self-organize their way around the rotary for better flow and overall safety. So it was really interesting to experience.
There's something to be said about that, about how frustrating it is as a human experience to be sitting at a light with no one coming, no one going, and you not be able to make a decision.
Right.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, and so I think this ties back to one of those questions I started off with, where if you saw a disruption coming, would you be stuck at a red light? Or are we organizing ourselves in our group in a way that the information flows,
What do you think?
and then we can. I think in a lot of ways, yes. I think for the most part, yes, especially in an open source, since nobody's getting paid. I mean, there is money elements to it, but in a lot of ways, I think there is volunteerism. So I think by that nature that it's going to correlate a lot to a self-organizing. It is in a lot of ways a self-organizing body, but I do think that it's not. I think we have ways to go to start to feel like we're protected against disruption. I think that in a lot of ways we're sitting ducks, and I think it's not even just Drupal. I was having a conversation the other night with somebody who's more involved in the WordPress community, and so one of the things that they're working, Matt Mullenweg is having people work on is the Gutenberg project, because he sees Wix and Weebly and Squarespace doing similar things. He's seeing the disruption, but is it really? Is that the best we can do? Is that we're depending on very few people to see the disruptions and to drive change? Are there improvements that we could make so
I don't
that?
want to interrupt, but
Well, no, this is perfect. Yeah.
Dries at Drupalcamp Europe, he talked about making it easier at an entry level. Drupal right now, the experience people have is that as you get to know it and use it, you like it more.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas WordPress, you like it in the beginning because it's easy entry.
Yeah.
And then as time moves on, you like it less and less. As your expertise grows, it doesn't evolve with you.
Right.
And so what he was talking about was how do we make it so that you get in now, you can get in? How do we lower the barrier to entry for this product?
Right. Yeah. I think there's so much that we're doing right.
Yeah.
And I think the places.
Oh, for sure, we're doing so much.
Yeah. And I think the places that we could do better, I think we're trying to figure it out. I talk a little bit about, I touch on sociocracy a little bit in this talk, and I know another person that's thinking about these things is Ben Melancombe from Agaric, and so he has a talk that he gives that focuses on sociocracy, but really it's so I'll get to some of the slides to think about like what are the things we could consider trying to, and that's the tricky thing too, because in a sense nobody is in charge of anybody else, so we can't just tell people what to do, and we kind of don't want to tell people what to do. So it's kind of this thing of like getting alignment on how we understand what we're doing, and coming up with ideas together about how we might increase the awareness and increase the equivalence amongst everybody. So and traffic is a great example of how in a complex system, the self-organized critical state is the most efficient. Okay? If there was never a little jam, if there was never a little fender bender, then we probably could fit more cars on the road. If we opened the floodgates and flooded it with cars, we would just have gridlock and no cars would get through ever. Or if we had too much of a bottleneck or something. So it's the most efficient state is one where we're going to have a little bit of friction as we get the most cars through possible. So that says something else about resilience, where if we are doing the most we can possibly do together, if we are solving the hardest problems, there are going to be uncomfortable things. There could, likely be uncomfortable things of all sizes across any data set. So we need so rather than trying to prevent those, maybe with a traffic light, which is going to cause more deaths, how do we understand, and this ties back into like how do we communicate, how do we understand what's going on inside each other, how can we be resilient to those avalanches when they happen, how can we be resilient to those fender benders when they happen. So something else that we know about self-organized critical states is that they require equivalence, and something that has been said in kind of teamwork industries is that to be a team, To be an agile team, you need a goal and you need equivalence amongst all the members. So it's the same thing in a self-organized critical state. You need an equivalence amongst all the members. The Sandpiles have an equivalence. The cars have an equivalence. If we want to be a self-organizing team of people, we can't have there be bosses of anybody else, because the boss is who you're going to ask for approval, and then you're not self-organizing. And you need that shared goal. So in the Sandpile, it's almost like, so goal is kind of a stand-in word, I think, for that steady change state. So in the Sandpile, it's the sand dropping. In the traffic, it's the each car moving through the thing down the road. With us as teams trying to accomplish something, it's our goal. Our goal is always having a little bit of a change, or customer requests, or customer trying to satisfy the customer as they change. Okay, so at this point in the talk, I'm thinking that where we are at is we are understanding that self-organization is the best. A self-organized critical state is the most efficient in a complex system, in complexity, and to get that, we're all equals, and we're all engaged. Ideally, we're all engaged, and so if we're starting to think about, as that group, how can we? What I wrote here is mutate to innovate. So if we're in it, to use an evolution analogy, we could have some type of animal or some type of being that is faced with a disruption to their existence, and it's the mutations that let them survive and thrive throughout their existence and the future of their of the type of critter they are. So how do we, as a group of people, unleash these essentially mutations and innovations? So there's this kind of suite of facilitation techniques that I think is incredibly valuable and not widely known yet, and it's called liberating structures. And really what a liberating structures is trying to do is unleash everyone in a group so that they can deliberate and learn together. So it creates an equivalence in a group of people. Is this 2:15 to 3? Okay. All right. So if you imagine right now, a presentation is not a liberating structure. I'm in control of the content. I'm just telling you guys what's up, and maybe only guessing by reading your faces what your perspective might be. So that is not a liberating structure. If I said, all right, cut off the presentation, we're not even going to do that. What I'm going to do is we're all going to get around a table and we're just going to brainstorm some ideas. That's a situation where the introverts are kind of going to back away and the extroverts are going to dominate. That's not a liberating structure. So my favorite example of a liberating structure is called 1-2-4 all. And what 1-2-4 all is it starts with, it says to a group of people, all right, every one person, we have a question that we're asking that we're trying to figure out. Every one person answer this question. So if our question was, what control might we try using transparency instead? And what I meant to talk about when I brought up beyond budgeting is the beyond budget. The guy who wrote Beyond Budgeting is the guy who makes that traffic analogy. And in Beyond Budgeting, one of the examples of things that they try to get beyond budgeting is to control spending by having transparency. So if everybody has, let's say everybody has a travel budget, you're just going to spend that travel budget. Why not? It's my budget, I'm going to spend it. But what they found was that they said there are no more travel budgets. Everybody just do what you need to do to get there safely and comfortably and whatever, just to take care of your basic needs, take care of yourself. All you have to do is publish that. You have an internal blog. Just say what deal you got, or just write what it was, just complete transparency. What they found was that expenses in travel in this company, and this has been done replicated in multiple companies, went down, just plummeted. Because nobody wants to be seen as frivolous or not getting a bad deal. People want to be seen as being efficient and good spenders. And so what they found was that by trusting people, everybody can become, and having transparency as the control, not these rules made up by someone who's not there, but have transparency be the control, everybody became mini finance managers. And so that's really that's a little seed to the idea of beyond budgeting, is with trust and autonomy and values and a lot of harder work, you can create a situation where everybody, rather than spending all their budget and starting to make smart decisions when the budget runs out, people are making smart decisions at every decision. Okay, so if we wanted to bring it back to liberating structures, 1, 2, 4, all, we could say we're trying to figure out how can we bring more of this thinking back to organizations. What control might we try using transparency instead? So what's going on in our organizations where there's some process step that maybe we could just make it transparent and say, don't worry about it, just post it. Like maybe like a continuous education thing, where normally everybody has a continuing ed budget. Now it's like, well, anybody can buy any continuing ed thing they want, just post it here, something like that. So I just gave away what my answer would be. But for mutating to innovate, 1, 2, 4, all, everybody think to yourself and write down 1 or 2 or 3 of those. Then the 2 part, turn to your neighbor and compare your lists and kind of shuffle them around and maybe pick out 1 or 2 that were had the most impact to you. Then the 4 part is the 2 of you turn to 2 others and talk about your lists and see which ones. And then the all part is each group kind of shares what they came up with. So it's a liberating structure because it lets each person come up with their stuff on their own, but then it aggregates it in as a group together. So it unleashes everyone and brings all those ideas to the surface. Another example of open space is something that we're already doing. We call them birds of a feather, but we could do it a little bit more, where we have open spaces to come up with ideas or topics to talk about and put them out there, and self-organize with the group who's going to glom on to which idea. And the ideas that resonate with the most people will have the most self-assigning people to them, to those initiatives. And those, I'm not sure how it works now. I know a few DrupalCons ago, the initiatives were announced on the screen, like
11 initiatives.
Yeah, so something was come up with somewhere with some group of people, and now they're the initiatives. So that seems to be working, and I think that there's a strong likelihood that will continue to work. But is that the best? Like, is there ways that we can understand how we all fit into everything and how all these techniques work?
I think Olivera, which you're talking about today, was an initiative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, one that I kind of found out about it when it was done.
Oh, that's tough. Yeah.
So.
Is that frustrating?
Well, I mean, maybe that's fine, and that's the thing. I don't really know if I did. I guess one of the things that is an opportunity maybe is to open things up more, where it feels like more of an invitation. I think it feels a little bit like, because it's a duocracy. So a duocracy is a little bit different. So if I really, 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 really want to make a change, I can push in and drive this thing. And I think it's working for the most part, but I do wonder, like, are there ways that we can unleash and engage everyone? How can we try to create more equivalence across all the members? Maybe it's something to think about, I think. So decision making is the sociocracy piece to this. Sociocracy is a dynamic form of governance for people that creates an equivalence amongst all the members. And this starts to become an issue if we believe in self-organized criticality as the most efficient approach to complexity as a group of people, then we have equivalence across all of our members. And if we have equivalence of all of our members, then no one's in charge. And if no one's in charge, then we all need a way to decide. And so one of the interesting things about sociocracy is it uses what they call double linking. which if you have a group of people, if you have multiple different groups of people, you need to include as a decision maker deciders from other groups in your group. So if there is, and now I'm just making these up because I've been a little checked out of it for a while, but if there is kind of a core group and there are other subgroups, you want to make sure that someone from those lower groups is included as a decider, so that they can represent their other groups. And the way the decisions happen are consent-based, which means, does anybody object? If there's an objector, then we can't do it. We need to talk about what we need to change about it to make it more acceptable. So you include everyone, and everyone has equal say, and you don't go for consensus. Consent is not consensus is an important piece to that. So as a group, you become good at coming up with safe to try ideas that people can live with trying. They don't have to be all for it or agree with doing it or be a driver of it. They say, okay, I don't object. Nobody objects to this thing, so we're going to try it, and we're going to see if it works, and we're going to come back, and we're going to see if we want to keep doing it. So we could try, so if you wanted to try a consent-based decision with a 1, 2, 4 all result, which I threw one out there because we're running out of time. Part of this talk is me trying this out to see what the timings of things are. So to do a consent-based decision on that 1, 2, 4 all result, which I threw out there as we could try with continuing ed budget. We don't have continuing ed budgets anymore, we just have transparency. So does anybody object to us having a page that everybody that people want to get, they can just get it, but they have to post it up? Does that seem safe to anybody? Does that seem reckless to anybody? If anybody that objects, do you have a version of that we might try? So that's how that would work. And then acting and reacting with agility. Here, I alluded this a little bit, where customer happiness is both a goal and a drip of constant change. So those are like the sand piles dropping, and we're going to have avalanches, and we need to deliver, but we also need to be listening and learning from their needs. And we also need resilience with to field those avalanches of all sizes. And so we can't have agility without equivalence, and we have the goal, which is the drip of constant change and customer happiness. And to be able to deliver and to be able to listen and learn effectively, we need the equivalence, we need the self-organizing team. That's why agility is a good fit for this aspect of the complexity. And most importantly, there are other disruptors out there evolving and innovating. In the evolution space, there's what's known as the Red Queen effect, and it has a quote by Alice from Alice in Wonderland. Well, in our country, said Alice, still panting a little, you'd generally get to somewhere else if you ran very fast for a long time, as we've been doing. A slow sort of country, said the Queen. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. So our competition is innovating. And for us to survive, we just there's a sense in which we at least need to keep up, right? So we need to be, so surviving and thriving means we've got to be good at this. You know, we've got to be trying, and we've got to be thinking, how can we do this better? How can we be an aware, deliberating, deciding, acting organism of thousands of people? You know, if Drupal is thousands of people, how can we engage and unleash everyone so that we are best suited to survive and thrive? Better suited than our constantly evolving, innovating, other disrupting competition. We need to be the disruptors. So just matching the competition again and again and again, we're just responding. We're not disrupting. So how do we do that? So we talked about doing that through open spaces, through different liberating structures, through creating more equivalence in our deliberation and decisions as a group, looking for ways to be more agile and responsive. So some conclusions for Drupal is self-organized criticality is nature's defense against disruption. It can be ours too. Self-organized criticality is a form of resilience. It can be ours too. And systemic resilience innovates. And what I mean by that is bringing in things like sociocracies, double linking, and consent-based decision making, and bringing in more liberating structures is going to increase the equivalence of our system and increase our self-organized critical state and lead to more innovations, because we'll be operating at that more equal state where more perspectives are being involved, and we'll be able to recover from more avalanches better. I think we want to be asking as a group of people, is everyone engaged and unleashed? Or are people kind of stifled or keeping quiet, kind of just watching this Drupal thing saying, oh, I'll keep supporting it until my customers change their minds, right? You know, Drupal survived a pretty big disruption of its own making when it went from 6 to 7 and then 7 to 8. We had lots of customers like, we think we're done, you know? I know Amherst College down the street from me, they were like, we barely survived that 6 to 7 upgrade. We're jumping ship. And they're migrating to Drupal 8 now, but they considered jumping ship for a while. So Drupal survived it on the whole, but yeah. So do we have equivalence amongst our members? Are decisions decentralized enough? And then the conclusion questions for the Drupal in each of us. Who are we depending on for Drupal's survival? What could you do if you saw a potential disruption? Would that thing that you do be effective? How are the decisions made? Do we understand that? If we tried to make a change, I know that I wanted to. Is Olivera, is that like a backend, like an admin thing?
It is, no, it's not. There's a different admin thing. That's kind of Clara is the admin.
Oh, that's really good.
And Olivera is replacing Bartek.
Okay. Yeah, so years ago, 2016, 2017, I was trying, my last home meeting, we were doing that for clients, and we even made it into like abstracted thing, but it was hard to figure out how to like make that a thing that other people were doing. It wasn't completely clear, so it would be interesting to try to improve that, because we were trying to do that, and we do have a version of that we do on all of our projects. But yeah, and will our organizations act fast enough? So I have some resources in these slides from the talk, different books and articles, and we had some thoughts throughout the talk. I don't know if I think I'm out of time. Contribution day is tomorrow. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nick.